Hello and welcome. In today's exciting episode, I will be making a vintage style cropped jacket. It's Simplicity 9473 and it is adorable. It's perfect. Perfect jacket. So I originally bought this tweed at the start of the pandemic, but it took forever to get here because of the delivery disruptions. But so it's one of the last tweeds I've bought years ago. And I originally bought it to make a Chanel style Vogue 7975 type jacket out of it. But I'm trying to use new patterns, and so I thought I would use this new look one. It's got lapels but not a collar. But because the lapels, they're a little bit wider, I didn't quite have enough fabric for that. So I'm going to try this Simplicity one. I also didn't quite have enough fabric for this one, so I had to crop it slightly. But I'll still get the general idea of what the pattern is like. The smallest size this Simplicity comes in is a 10, and my jackets are usually a 6. So it's going to be boxy and baggy anyway, but I like the vintage style Chanel jackets, which are particularly boxy and not exactly well fitted. So that's what we're doing. So I've cut out all the pieces in the tweed, the navy blue tweed, and I've also cut out a structural layer in the bright orange netting. Normally, of course, I would use black, but when I sew black to the back of this really dark blue, you won't be able to see it. So I'm using this neon color so that you can see what I'm doing at each stage. So the next step is to lay out all the pieces in the order that you're going to machine sew them together. So this is the structural layer done first. So we've got front, center, side front, side back, center back, and all the way along right to the other front center piece. And then I overlay each piece of tweed on top of the structural layer. And so all the pieces are in order now. And then the next thing to do is to go along and carefully pin each piece of tweed to each backing piece. And it's better if you can just pin them at this stage and not sew them together, because the body is round. If you sew them flat, then it will once you put them all together, it won't be as round as a jacket should be. So at this stage, if you can just work with them being pinned together, it is difficult, but your end jacket will turn out better. What I did was pinned the two layers together so that I can work with them as one layer, so each piece as one piece rather than two separate pieces. And now I'm going to pin them together so I can do the machine sewing along the long seams. So I just sort of flip each piece on top of the next one and carefully pin them at the notches and then pin the rest. And I did that all around the torso. And here you go, I've sort of carefully laid it out so you can see it. So these are the seams that I'm going to sew by machine. A lot of sewing machines can't handle structural layer plus tweed. It's perfectly fine to hand sew them all. That's what they do on the really expensive jackets. So if your machine won't do it, that's fine to hand sew your jacket. It's actually better, but I'm running really, really short of time. So I machine sewed mine. And then the next step is, as you can see, everything is machine sewed. Just really carefully. You can do it at half speed is better because it is tricky working with so many layers. And once all your pieces are sewn together at the main seams, then on the torso, what you do is you sew the front top and the back top together, and that forms the shoulder. Then once all these primary seams are done, you pin back the seam allowance. You just sort of splay it open with your fingers and then pin it and just go along and do each seam methodically. When you're pinning back the bits where there's a curve, pin the straight and then pin the other straight, then clip the curve and then pin that bit is the easiest way to do it. And don't trim down the seam allowance. Always leave the most seam allowance that you can. It's a sign of a luxurious garment. With fast fashion, it's cheaper to cut smaller pieces. So there's always a minuscule, this is me showing you clipping the curves. So you pin the straight at the bottom and the straight at the top. Then you clip the curve and then you pin that middle bit. It's the easiest, safest way to do it, and you get the best result. So yeah, and always just don't cut your seam allowance down. I mean, obviously under the arm and when you're doing the neckline, you do need to clip those down a bit to make sure they sit right, but everywhere else you just leave it. So then I went along and all the bits that were pinned, I hand stitched all that seam allowance down. So you do it with hand stitching because it's better and you can't see it from the outside. So you're just securing the garment, and no, you don't iron anything. The backing fabric, the net, is basically plastic, it's nylon, so you don't want to do that. So the next step is to hand sew the backing fabric to the tweed, and I put pins in lines so that I know where I have to sew, and you just stitch the backing fabric to the tweed so that they basically if you've ever seen a vine grow on a fence or ivy grow on a house, ivy can't grow up straight by itself. It needs something backing it. It's the same with tweed. Tweed is an absolutely gorgeous fabric, but it needs a support system. So that's what the backing fabric is. And you can't just drape them near each other. The tweed will sag. You have to sew them to each other, and you need to, it's kind of like not too tight, not too loose, so that it supports it, but you still keep the beauty of the tweed. And I was just showing you another one where I'm actually going to bead this one as soon as I'm done. So yeah, and I'm really short of time, so I'm not going to show you me doing the whole of the jacket, because the outer jacket is just going to be beaded. And when you do the beading, obviously, if you know how beading's done, basically you work from the back and your needle goes through the structural layer, through the tweed, through the bead, back through the tweed, back through the structural layer. So you're effectively sewing all the layers together. It just takes a lot more skill. So it's better, easier to separate the tasks. And when you're making the jacket, sew the tweed to the backing fabric. And then if you happen to do beading, you can also strengthen it by, doing that attachment as well, just as a byproduct of beading. Anywho, that's long story short, you should always attach your tweed to the backing fabric. But because I'm the one who also beads, I'm going to skip that step now because I know I'm going to bead it just very soon. But I definitely need to do these lining pieces, these two pieces here, and that one on the right is the yoke for the back. So these are actually the lining pieces. So I had to hand sew them because obviously the beading is only on the outside of the jacket, not on those two tweed bits on the front of the inside. So those ones aside, now we've got these three pieces, and the next step is to, I've just turned the sleeve in the correct way, so they are all ready to go. So the next step is, here we go, I'll just show it to you on the mannequin. So this is what it looks like so far. It doesn't really look like much, and it's hard to judge because until you've done the neckline, no jacket ever sits properly on the mannequin until you've done the neckline, which is like the last thing that you do. But it gives you a rough idea of how it fits. As I said, I usually make size 6 jackets, and this is a size 10. So it is going to be a jacket that I can wear with lots of layers underneath. But, the shape is fine. It's what I expected. So I'm going to move on. I don't have to make any alterations. So the next step I have to do is just turn the jacket inside out, and I'm just going to pin over the shoulder. I'm just going to pin an extra couple of layers of fabric there just to strengthen the shoulder. So turn the jacket inside out, cut a couple of extra strips of this backing fabric, and I'll pin them in place. Now, normally when I cut out my structural layer, this bright orange one in this case, I just save some of the scraps, and after I've cut out all these bits, I get a couple of big scraps and I use them to do these shoulder bits. But obviously I need to show you the different colours, so I'll use a different, but don't buy a second bit of netting in a different colour. Just use the scraps from what you have. I just have to, so you can see what I'm doing. So the easiest way to do this is put your jacket on the mannequin inside out, and then take your 2 bits, well 4 because you need 2 for each side, pin them to the middle, and then with the lightest touch, just sort of hold them in place at the back. They sort of have to hang a little off the shoulder so that the sides will fit right. And then you just loosely pin the back 2, and then the front, and then the front bottom. And then once that's, so if you don't get it right the first time and there's a little unevenness, just do it again. And then once you're happy with it, just put some pins in the neck side as well, just to hold the whole thing in place. And the point of this, again, is to get a nice rounded shape on your shoulder and to protect, because I bead my jackets with quite a lot of weight. And the way I bead them, basically the thread acts like roots of a tree. So it's quite secure, but this just helps it hold its shape and be more structurally sound. Plus, I want my jackets to last for decades. So this is just one step you can do. So I've pinned both of them in place. Now that they've got that rounded shape sort of built into the way it's pinned, I can take it off the mannequin and just hand sew them. So it doesn't have to look good, because once you finish this, you're going to put the sleeves on, then you're going to put the lining in, and no one will ever be able to see into this bit. It has to be functional. It doesn't have to be pretty. So make sure the tension is not too tight and not too loose. You want all the layers exactly where they are now, and you want them to hold that place, but you don't want them to cling too tightly or be not tight enough and sort of jiggle around. So just either 4 or 5 rows of stitching so that everything is held in place correctly. And then so here we go. And as you can see, you can't really see, but it keeps the shape of the shoulder really nicely. So here you go. And it doesn't change the shape of, some people think I'm doing it to change the shape of the jacket. I'm not. I'm doing it so that it keeps its shape better. And now you can see there's a little bit left overhang, so you just need to trim that off, because when you sew the sleeves in, it's so helpful if it's exactly right. So just trim it down a tiny bit. Now it is time to set the sleeves. The easiest way to do this, I find, is to put pins in where your tabs, where your notches are. So I put a blue or a colourful pin in the back notch, so I know where the back of the sleeve is, and then all the other pins, and then so I've got centre top, centre bottom, and then the 2 bottom notches. They're the important notches to me, so they're the ones that I always do. And as I said, the back notch is always the colour one, and everything else is a plain pin. So, and then I do the same on the jacket. So the colourful pin is the back notch, the front, the seam is the center, and the other one is, it's basically the mirror image. And then I know exactly where to, because some people just cannot figure out which sleeve goes in which, and they constantly put the left sleeve on the right armhole. So this is a way of doing it that is way less confusing. Just put all the pins in, and with only one color one. So if you've got mainly yellow pins, use mainly yellow, and then just one that's white or one that's blue, and then go around. So you join the 2 top centers, then the 2 bottom centers, then the bottom third, then the bottom 2/3, and then you have to ease in that top third. So that's the trickiest bit. You always leave that till last. The rest has to be even, and then you have to ease in the rest at the top. It is quite tricky because you've got so many layers, and tweed is always quite tricky to work with because it's got a mind of its own. But slowly and surely we'll get you there. If you're getting too frustrated, just take out all the pins, go and have a coffee and try it again, and eventually you'll get it. So then you machine sew it, check it, machine sew it again, because you need it twice to be reinforced so that it's strong enough. And then you just put it on the mannequin. If there are any pucks or anything like that, puckers, you do need, or unintentional pleats, you do need to take it out and do the whole thing again, but this is fine. So once you're happy with it, the next step is to trim down the seam allowance. See the two notches here? It's about the bottom third of the armhole. You just need to trim down that seam allowance by half and clip the curves only by half. Don't trim it down any more than that. You don't want the thing falling apart. I constantly hear about on Instagram and other sewing channels about how they made their first jacket and the sleeves are falling apart. Just don't cut off too much seam allowance, just half. So once that's done, the next step is to make a little buffer at the top of your shoulder to make it sit out nicely. And it's French, but they use the English word cigarette, and you can see why. It's basically a vintage, how cigarettes used to be rolled in a paper and handmade. Well, yeah, during the war, World War II, I guess they were running short of shoulder pads and supplies in general, and this just helped people still make a living as a seamstress and make jackets, but they were just using up the scraps they had in their workrooms. So they cut these 10 centimeter squares, so 3 inches by 3 inches, and then you roll it up, and then you just sort of tuck it in here. So you put a pin in the middle and a pin on the center, the shoulder seam, and you join them up. Then you sort of hold it in place and with your other hand flip the jacket over so that from the outside, so you're sort of tucking that little roll of fabric in between. This is a different jacket that I made last year, but you can see how I flipped the seams allowance up, and then I'm going to stitch it to the outside jacket. Well, when you make a roll of fabric, the cigarette, you just tuck it in between the seam allowance and the outer jacket, and you nestle it in there, pin it in place, then you carefully go around and you stitch it in. I know it looks absolutely hideous at the moment, but spoiler alert, it turns out fine. This is way easier than making shoulder pads. So as you can see, I've done all the ugly pinning, so it looks ridiculous, but this is what I need to keep everything in, the seams and that bit of fabric, that roll of fabric in place. And now I'm going to stitch it from the outside first, and once I've done that, I'll turn the whole garment inside out, and I'll carefully stitch down all the seam allowance from the inside, so it's really, really secure. Okay, the first part is done. I've secured it from the outside, so I take each pin out as I go, just hand stitching. Now I turn the whole thing inside out. As you can see, there is one row of stitches all the way around, but now the seam allowance sort of flaps around and it's not quite secure yet. So now I'm just going to have to go around on the inside and hand stitch that down too, so that it's all nice and secure. Yeah, it does take a lot of time, but to me, this part of it is so completely worth it. It just makes the sleeves so good. And yeah, I've got jackets that I made 15 years ago, and the sleeves are beautiful. I love them. So they're nice and rounded. So when you get to this point and you've done those 2 lots of stitching, I've got the other one to go, but you just roll this seam between your fingers and it just helps all the seams settle. And yeah, so now I have finished both of them and we'll put it on the mannequin. There we go. It just makes the smallest difference, but it is like physically small, but to the silhouette of the jacket, it's huge. So here it is from the side and here it is from the back. It's definitely a size 10 jacket, not a size 6. And, but yeah, what are you going to do? I should have scaled it down, I guess, but it's a size 10 jacket. So I'm going to leave that on the mannequin, and it is time to make the lining. So I've just used the magenta silk because I really like the way it looked in the last jacket that I made. I think navy blue and magenta look absolutely adorable together. So I cut out all the pieces and then used those 3 tweed pieces as well and sewed them all together. So now it is time to lay out the outer jacket and then tuck the sleeves in and then lay the inner jacket over the top. And I couldn't get a good shot of it, so I just put it back inside out on the mannequin. And as you can see, I've pinned the 2 together. And now I just have to machine sew all around. So here we go. I went off and machine sewed all the way up the front, around the neckline and down the front. And so now I have to clip the curves and then carefully turn the whole thing in the correct way and pin where I'm going to top stitch. So here we go. I've turned it in the correct way and I've got lots of top stitching to do up the front, around the neckline and down the front again. But I also need to turn up those sleeves, so I've done that. You just measure all the way around, then pin them up. So now I have to hand stitch, do loads of hand stitching. I also turned up the hem. So I think I hand stitched the hem first, then I hand stitched the cuffs, the 2 cuffs, and after I did that, then I did all the top stitching along the front center, right around the neckline, and then down the other side. And the next step, the final step you do if you're not going to bead your jacket, is that you turn up the raw edge of the silk and you stitch that down to the hem, and then you just lay a chain it there and you hand stitch it to the bottom there, so it's got a nice weight on the back of the jacket. But obviously I make my jackets so that I can use up my bead collection. The beading is the main part of it for me. So I'm going to leave this open just for now so that I can get access into the back to do all that embellishment. So here we go, the final reveal. Sorry that it's at night. I usually try and wait until the next day to do all the shooting of this last section, but I still have to edit all this, and well, I'm doing the voiceover now. So yeah, it's definitely a size 10 rather than a size 6, and because I'm such a slight frame, I really do prefer to wear, when I do wear jackets, I really prefer them to be a fitted one. But it's a beautiful jacket. I think, I don't know, I'll leave it as it is for now. But yeah, I'll probably alter it. It's this type of jacket, the princess seam into the arm side, is actually really easy for someone with my body shape. It's really easy to alter. You just basically make a back center seam and then re-sew the 2 front, like the 2 front center bits. So it will only take me about, I don't know, half an hour to alter, which is pretty good for a handmade jacket. So I don't know, I'll probably make it into a size 6 just because I would wear it so much more. If it was, the better fitting a jacket is, the more I wear it. So, but for a size 10, it's beautiful. And yeah, it is very cropped, like to the point where it's bolero length, whereas the actual jacket was a couple of inches longer. So these are the pieces. I traced out all my pieces, but then I didn't really have enough tweed, so I had to crop it by a couple of inches on each side. The you can see the lining length is 2 centimeters shorter, so half an inch shorter from that again. But yeah, it's a good 2 inches shorter than it should be. So, but I mean, I like it. It just shows off, defines the waist beautifully. So I think it does its job, and it's so vintage. I knew if I made this in tweed, it would look vintage. So that it does have these scalloped bits, but I think this is a birder jacket that I'm trying next month, and I think I'll try if I like this birder jacket, which I think I will. It's also a princess seam into the arm side, so it's the same type of jacket, but this one is more it's more like the Vogue 7975, which is the jacket pattern that I prefer the most, prefer like more than anything. So I'll try that one, and if I like that pattern, then I'll do the scallopy bit, these sort of rounded edges here between the front center and the side front panel. So I don't know, I don't particularly like it, but a lot of people said they would be interested to see how that looks. So we will see. I'm sorry I didn't do it for this one. I did intend to do it for this one, but this tweed just, the piece of tweed was so much thinner than I thought it would be. Like I thought it would be wider. So the jacket on the left is one that I made at least a decade ago using Vogue 7975, which is my preferred pattern. And every time I show this jacket, I have to do a close-up on the beaded trim. Yes, I did make the beaded trim a very long time ago, which is why it's not exactly even. I do keep threatening to pull it off and redo it, but oh my gosh, it just took so long. And it's got giraffes and dinosaurs and tigers and these cut glass sort of crystal-y looking bits of beads in there. It's got everything in there. I love it. Oh, and please excuse the background. I really was in a rush to shoot this and I didn't have time to clean up. I do think this Simplicity one looks incredibly vintage, but I think part of that is just the bolero length, like the super cropped length. But yeah, I do like it. It's a really nice jacket. But I personally, for what I use my jackets for all the beading, I still prefer the Vogue 7975. So this is them from the side. That shorter one really does show off the waist beautifully. And here it is from the back. I really do love the back of a princess seam into the arm side jacket. I do think they're beautiful. Obviously, it's a size 10, so it doesn't fit my mannequin terribly well. But as far as if you put that on a size 10 person, it would be a beautiful, beautiful jacket. I'm really happy with it as far as patterns go. I did have to draft my own lining. They have facing, so the centre front, they get you to do 2 panels there, and there's also something in the back. But if you want a full lining and you don't know how to draft it yourself, I do have a video on it, or you can just use the Vogue 7975 and they've drafted all the pieces of the pattern for you in that one. That's why it's kind of my default. If you've made the Vogue 7975 jacket, every other jacket pattern, even if it has mistakes, you still know what's a mistake and that you should change it because the Vogue 7975 teaches you so well, or it taught me so well. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And yeah, have fun making your own Chanel style jacket.